Chapter 126, Interrogation. Kakashi looked at the two jounins and stepped forward. He handed them a letter and said, "The Hokage has assigned us the mission to escort the prisoner and carry the dead bodies back to Konoha." Renjiro and Saiki nodded. Renjiro took out a scroll and handed it to Kakashi and said, "The bodies of the 9 dead ones are in this scroll." Kakashi took the scroll and stored it properly. Saiki got up and said, "Follow me. I'll take you to the prisoner." Kakashi and his squad followed Saiki and Renjiro. They entered a small room. At the center of this room was a chair. A woman was sitting in it. Her arms were tied to the arms of the chair. Her legs were missing. A gag was stuffed in her mouth. Her head had dropped down. She was being watched by 2 Chunins. One of them was a medical ninja. Renjiro said, "We investigated her a bit. Her name is Jo and she is a jounin from the Sakai clan. She can use the boil release." Saiki added, "We injected her with anesthesia, but her body is very resistant to it. She wakes up after 2 hours and has to be injected again." Kakashi nodded and said, "That won't be an issue. Can you wake her up?" The medical ninja stepped forward and began waking up. He looked at one of his squad members and said, "Ferret, put her to sleep." After some time, Jo woke up. She looked at Renjiro and the Umbu ninjas. A terrified look appeared in her eyes. Itake, who was the Umbu with the codename Ferret, stepped in front of her and looked into her eyes. Jo looked at the Umbu in front of her as his eyes turned red. Itake cast a genjutsu on her, making her fall into a deep sleep. Itake stepped back and said, "It's done. She won't wake up for a day." Kakashi nodded. He looked at Renjiro and said, "We will be taking her. Thank you for completing the mission. There are further orders from Lord Hokage. Her capture shouldn't be talked about. Discuss with everyone who knows that she has been captured and tell them to not talk about it to anyone. If they have already spoken to others or anyone knows about her capture, then chat with them as well and impose a gagging order. Lord Hokage has said that this is very important." Saiki replied, "My men haven't met with anyone else. But, probably, everyone in the outpost knows about her. I will talk with them and impose a gagging order about this." Kakashi nodded and said, "Thank you." One of Kakashi's Umbu subordinates untied Jo and carried her. Kakashi and his squad took their leave and left for Konoha. Fujin and his teammates would remain ignorant about the terrible fate awaiting the jounin captured by them. They slept peacefully as Jo was carried to Konoha. They woke up early the next morning and assembled with Renjiro. Saiki got up early as well to bid farewell to them. He said, "See you later, Renjiro. Stop by here while returning to Konoha." Renjiro nodded, "Sure. We could use a good sleep." Saiki looked at the kids and smiled, "Take care all of you. Come back safely." Miko replied, "Don't worry, we will complete the mission in no time." Fujin nodded and added, "Just make that roasted meat again when we are back." Saiki's sweat dropped thinking, "These 3 ate half my share yesterday." He smiled and said, "I'll be sure to hunt some wild beasts for you guys." They said goodbyes and left for the land of hot water. While Team Renjiro was headed to the land of hot water, Kakashi and his squad returned to Konoha. They imprisoned her in the T&I department. Ibiki waited with them in the prison. Understanding the importance, Hiruzen himself showed up. Seeing Hiruzen, all 4 Umbu respectfully greeted him, "Lord Hokage." Hiruzen nodded and looked at Jo. He looked at Itake and said, "Wake her up from the genjutsu and place her under a new one." I want to interrogate her. At that time, another person entered the prison. He was an old man. His right arm was concealed within and hanging inside his black robe. His right eye was bandaged. Hiruzen looked at him and asked, Danzo, why are you here? Danzo looked at Joe and said, I heard about taking a prisoner from Kiri. Continue your interrogation, I will discuss it with you later. Hiruzen nodded and looked at Itaka. Itaka stepped forward and dispelled the genjutsu. Joe woke up and looked up. However, Itaka put her in another genjutsu. After she fell into the genjutsu, Itaka removed the gag stuffed in her mouth. He looked at Hiruzen and said, You can ask her questions, Lord Hokage. Hiruzen looked at Ibiki and said, Ask her about why they entered the Land of Fire. Ibiki nodded and asked Joe, Why did your squad enter the Land of Fire? Joe answered, My team was on a mission in the Land of Water. Unfortunately, we were discovered by a squad from Mizukage's faction. They chased us relentlessly. We clashed a few times and were injured. The chase brought us close to the Land of Fire and we entered it hoping to find a good hiding place till they left us. I didn't think they would chase us inside the Land of Fire as well. Ibiki noted what she said. He asked, What was your mission? Joe answered, We got information that the Karatachi family had documents and maps that showed where all the ninjas in the Mizukage faction were deployed. Since the family head of Karatachi was in a battle, we got a mission to steal those documents. The mission parameters surprised everyone in the room. Danzo immediately wanted to get his hands on those documents. Ibiki asked, Did you complete the mission? Joe answered, Yes, we stole the documents successfully. Ibiki asked, Where are those documents? Joe answered, Since we were being chased, we hid them in a secure location in the Land of Water. Ibiki asked, Will anyone be collecting those documents? Joe answered, There is one ninja who checks that spot frequently. By now, it would have been collected and reached the hands of the Sakai clan patriarch. Ibiki asked her where the secure location was and noted it down. Ibiki asked, Did you see the locations where the forces of the Mizukage faction are located? Joe answered, No. After asking, he looked at Hiruzen. Hiruzen said, Ask her about the situation of the Sakai clan, other bloodline clans and the current state of the conflict. Also, ask her about their current hideouts and where the clans are located. Danzo added, Also ask her if they have hidden some family members in safe locations. Ibiki nodded and began questioning. He ended up questioning Joe for over 3 hours. Konoha got information about the locations of bloodline clans, locations of some of their secret hideouts, the number of ninjas they had, the losses they faced, the losses they inflicted upon the Mizukage faction, skills and weaknesses of their strongest fighters and some other miscellaneous information. While the information she provided wasn't complete, she ended up providing a lot of valuable information to Konoha. The rebel faction of Kirigakure would have never imagined that their mission to steal information from the Mizukage faction would result in their secrets getting exposed to Konoha. Chapter 127, Horrible Fate. After getting all the information, Joe was restrained again. Hiruzen looked at the Umbu squad and Ibiki and said, Good work. Don't tell anyone about her being taken as captive to anyone. They nodded and left the prison. While leaving, Itaka's face was grim, though no one noticed it under his mask. Or rather, no one apart from Hiruzen and Danzo, who observed him carefully. Understanding the disastrous consequences of civil war made him realize the catastrophe that would fall on Konoha if the Uchiha clan were to rebel. It planted a seed to avoid a civil war at all costs inside his heart. As he left, Both Hiruzen and Danzo exchanged eye contact. Danzo understood why Hokage had assigned the squad Itachi was in on this mission. They didn't speak about Itachi as no words needed to be spoken. Danzo looked at Hiruzen and said, "She provided a lot of information. We need to cross-check with the information provided by our spies to confirm that there were no traps hidden in the information." Hiruzen nodded and replied, "Send a root ninja who has the information to my office. I will have him cross-check our information with an Umbu ninja." Danzo nodded. He looked at Hiruzen, who seemed to be in thought. Danzo asked, "What are you thinking about?" Hiruzen looked at him and replied, "Do you remember the proposal that we received from the rebel faction before the Chunin exams?" Danzo nodded. Hiruzen continued, "I thought it was weird that the Terumi clan patriarch reached out to us. Now, it seems like it was the idea of Terumi Mei. She has the bloodline of both, Terumi as well as Sakai clans, and is able to use 2 Keki I Genkai. Looks like she will be the next leader in Kiri." Danzo replied, "Yes, it was likely her. 2 Keki I Genkai in the same person isn't threatening if they don't train well. But her leadership skills and charisma are good as well. She might become a threat. We should eliminate her." Hiruzen shook his head and replied, "The 4th Mizukage is a perfect Jinchuriki. He will be difficult to defeat. Let them exhaust each other's potential. Konoha doesn't need to involve itself and suffer any losses. After the civil war ends, we will talk with the winner." Danzo wanted to argue, but Hiruzen had made a good point. With the losses Kiri had taken due to the civil war, Kiri would be in no position to participate in a war for over a decade at least. Hiruzen looked at Danzo and felt something odd. Knowing Danzo, he predicted that he would have started a debate there. He asked, "Why are you here? It wouldn't be just for the information, right?" Danzo looked at Joe and said, "I want Sakai Joe." Hiruzen looked at Danzo in confusion. However, in less than a second, his eyes widened. He declined, "No." However, this time Danzo would not relent. This was the true reason why he visited the prison. He said, "Hiruzen, there are only 2 clans that have Keki I Genkai in Konoha. And one of them is about to rebel. With the Senju being unable to produce any wood Keki I Genkai ninja, we need to recruit other Keki I Genkai into our village. And they have to be loyal to Konoha. If we don't strengthen ourselves, then every time we have a weak moment, an incident similar to the Hyaga incident will keep repeating. Now that our forces are getting stabilized, we need to do everything to make ourselves stronger." Danzo's argument struck a chord in Hiruzen's heart. The Hyaga incident hurt him a lot. The weak state of Konoha had made him indecisive and reluctant. And that cost Konoha an innocent life. Danzo didn't speak anymore. He knew Hiruzen very well. Hiruzen thought for a few minutes and said, "If the other villages were to realize, they might attack Konoha together." Danzo scoffed and replied, "In every war, we keep getting attacked by all 4 villages. So it doesn't make a difference. Also, I will induct the kids into the root. So they won't be exposed to the world. Even inside Konoha, no one will know their origin. Besides, awakening Keki I Genkai is difficult. Very few awaken it. If someone awakens, we will expose the first one who awakens and say that he created the Keki I Genkai by combining fire and water natures. If anyone awakens it after him, we will hide that person inside the root." If Fujin was to hear this conversation, he'd be shocked. After all, he thought that a Keki I Genkai can only be inherited through the bloodline. Without it, there was no way to be able to use a Keki I Genkai. After all, even talented ninjas who had mastered all elements like Hiruzen and Kakashi never learned any Keki-I Genkai. Hiruzen sighed. He thought, he has done thorough preparation. I don't think I can win this debate. So, what to do? He thought for a bit and finally looked at Sakaijo. He sighed, she is already a waste. If we release her, she will hate Konoha with all her heart and use all her influence to make her clan take an anti-Konoha stance. If the bloodline clans win, our relationship will be sour. Looking at Hiruzen, Danzo understood what he was thinking. He said, the way ahead will be to deny meeting the squad from the rebel faction. We will deny knowing their existence. Remove their mentions from the reports. If the bloodline faction wins in Kiri and asks us about it, we will feign ignorance and push the blame on the Mizukage faction. Since the squad from the Mizukage faction died at the hands of Konoha ninjas, we can even claim that we took revenge for the bloodline faction. So we will be able to use this incident to better our relations. However, for that to happen, she needs to disappear. Hiruzen sighed again and agreed, all right. But ensure that no information about her leaks out. And all the progress has to be reported to me in secret. Danzo nodded. He was about to leave when he had a thought. He stopped and asked, Hiruzen, which team was assigned this mission? They were very thorough. Danzo had rushed here in a hurry. So he wasn't aware which squad had undertaken this mission. Hiruzen answered, it was Senjurenjiro and his students. Danzo's left eye widened. But it returned to normal quickly. He said, they are efficient. I want to induct them into the route. Hiruzen raised his left eyebrow and looked at Danzo. However, he couldn't figure out anything from his poker face. Hiruzen replied, one of his students is a Hyuga. They are not suitable for the route. Another is an Uchiha who is arrogant even by their standards. Good luck convincing her into joining the route. Danzo scoffed in displeasure. However, that was an act. He was interested in the wind user. While speaking, Hiruzen realized that Danzo's target should be Fujin. The others were just spoken as a distraction. Hiruzen continued, the third one is a civilian orphan. He could have been inducted into the route. Fortunately or unfortunately, it's too late. Danzo, who was hopeful about getting Fujin, felt like Hiruzen had played with him. He asked, why is it late? He isn't even a teenager yet. While it's true that the route mostly inducts 5 to 6 years old kids, we can still recruit older ones. Hiruzen shook his head and said, that boy is too headstrong. He wouldn't agree to have any seal put on him. He won't be a good match for the route. Besides, I already have plans for him. Danzo raised his left eyebrow and asked, what plans? Hiruzen smirked and answered, I will be inducting him into the Umbu and training him to be a negotiator for Konoha. Danzo had a lot of thoughts about what Hiruzen might say. However, this one left him dumbfounded. Chapter 128, Dodged a Bullet. Danzo stared at Hiruzen. After half a minute, he said, Hiruzen, the role of negotiator is for senior members in the village. Experience is important. What do you mean by sending someone who hasn't even entered his teens to represent Konoha during negotiations? Hiruzen chuckled and replied, our current negotiators are either too soft or too strict. While we do find a middle ground, we usually get the short end of the stick. Danzo scoffed and accused, it's your fault for being so soft. Don't accuse the rest of us. Hiruzen shook his head and replied, and your methods are way too harsh. We would be at war all the time if your ideas are followed. And of course, I won't send someone inexperienced to do the final negotiations for us. He will be among the first round of negotiators. And his task will be to annoy them just enough that the negotiations still stay on the table and we will have an advantage when we negotiate later. Danzo was surprised by Hiruzen's words and confidence. He wondered, what exactly did Hiruzen see in that boy? Hiruzen looked at Danzo and thought, on second thought, the prospect of sending Fujin to the route would be hilarious. Danzo tends to make promises while recruiting. If Fujin does enter the route, I wonder how often he will ask Danzo for a new jutsu. Danzo was about to say something, when Hiruzen interrupted, leave it. He is off the table. His talent would be wasted in the route. Seeing Hiruzen being stubborn, Danzo nodded and left. If Fujin was to learn about this conversation, he would sigh in relief and comment, phew. Barely dodged the bullet. That said, even without Hiruzen denying it, Fujin wouldn't have entered the route. While Danzo led the route and was very influential, he couldn't force anyone to join. He resorted to patriotism, offering rewards, blackmailing with closed ones, or lying in order to recruit existing ninjas to the route. However, neither of these four tactics would have worked on Fujin. While leaving, Danzo thought, that didn't go as expected. I didn't expect Hiruzen to be so stubborn about an orphan. Doesn't matter. I was only slightly interested in him due to his potential in wind nature manipulation. There's no point in wasting more effort on him. Danzo left and didn't think about Fujin again. Years later, he would hear about Fujin's exploits in the battlefields. In one such battle, Fujin's fame would explode throughout the ninja world. That battle would make Danzo regret not trying hard enough to recruit him. And the biggest regret would be when he dies by the hands of the orphan he attached no importance to. Team Renjiro ran at full speed for around 7 hours. The borders of the land of hot water were close to where the hideout was. While the hot spring hidden village was quite far away, the town that they were headed to was in the southern part of the land of hot water. Hence, it was much closer to them. After 7 hours, they entered Niigata town. On entering, Fujin commented, we entered into another country and then into their second biggest town and still haven't encountered even one ninja. Do they not have ninjas? Or are they too lazy to patrol? Renjiro chuckled and answered, only the 5 big hidden villages maintain frequent patrols. Even among the 5 big villages, Kiri and Suna don't do regular patrols due to the harsh terrain. In smaller villages, only the VIPs have good protection. If common people are in danger, then they issue missions to villages like ours. Fujin thought for a bit. He put up a sad face and said, I see. But in that case, the lives of the common people here are very vulnerable. They have no protection. Any rogue ninja can kill them and run away. If he hides well, then they won't even get justice. Renjiro looked at Fujin for a few seconds. He sighed and replied, unfortunately, that is the world we live in. There is nothing we can do. Fujin showed a sad face and didn't reply. Renjiro thought, though he is greedy, Fujin has a good heart. At the same time, Fujin thought, I don't think I can get any more jutsus from Renjiro. But improving my image even more would be beneficial. It might be of help if I need something from Tsunade in the future. She is of the same clan after all. Miko and Hoka watched Fujin and Renjiro. They began thinking about the sad state of affairs in the smaller villages as well. They began walking towards the center of the town. Renjiro said, well, no need to be entirely down. Though there isn't much protection, the major towns have a garrison. Perhaps, every town might have a garrison in the future. That would provide a good degree of protection to them. Fujin nodded and said, yeah, that could be a good start. They reached the center of the town. A mansion stood there. On seeing them, a watchman immediately invited them in while his partner ran inside to inform someone. The watchman said, welcome. Takahei-sama has been expecting you. Renjiro nodded and followed him inside the mansion. On entering, a large man appeared in front of them. He was 7 feet 5 inches in height and was very fat. Seeing him, the same thought ran through the minds of Fujin, Miko, and Hoka, did an Akimichi migrate here? He is huge even by their standards. Behind him, 4 more people were standing. Takeshita Takahei smiled and said, Senju Renjiro, I have heard a lot about you. Renjiro smiled and replied, Takeshita Takahei, I have heard about you too. Takahei said, we were expecting you to arrive a bit sooner. Renjiro replied, we had some troubles too. So we were delayed. Takahei nodded and looked at the kids behind Renjiro. He frowned and thought, the mission didn't mention any strict timelines. So I can't bug him more about it? But the mission focused more on the strength of the ninjas. Renjiro is strong, but why did they send kids? Renjiro looked at him and understood what he was thinking. But he didn't comment. Explaining the strength of the ninjas who undertook the mission wasn't a requirement. Completing the mission was all that mattered. Takahei knew that Renjiro understood his frown. But since he didn't provide any explanation, he decided to drop it while thinking, my own squad should be enough to kill those rogue ninjas. Unfortunately, the daimyo was worried about any losses we might suffer and hence issued a mission to Konoha. If they are weak, they will die. Renjiro asked, what are the details of those rogue ninjas? Also, where are they currently at? Takahei looked at a subordinate. Takeshita Shunso stepped forward. He said, until now, we have detected 13 rogue ninjas. We have calculated that there are 2 more. All of them are ninjas from the land of water. Among the 13 ninjas, there are 3 jounins and 10 chunins. Their leader is Kubota Mitsuzuka. He is a veteran jounin. The others under his command are experienced too. Some of them are ninjas who were assigned under him in the Third Great Ninja War. We haven't found their base. But looking at their movements, we have calculated their base to be near the coastline towards the southeast direction. Renjiro analyzed the information and said, good work. We won't have to waste time to find them. Takahei said, Renjiro, while we do know their approximate location, we don't know their exact location. Renjiro replied, don't worry. Leave that to us. We will take a break today. Tomorrow, at 4 a.m., we will leave. Have your team be prepared. Takahei wanted to leave immediately. But he understood that they had traveled a long distance. He nodded and said, all right. Shunso, arrange for their resting area. Shunso led them to the arranged rooms. After he left, Fujin, Miko, and Hoka stared at Renjiro. They wanted answers. Chapter 129, Joint Mission. Renjiro looked at his students' faces and chuckled. Miko was annoyed. She asked, why are they coming with us too? Renjiro answered, it's a joint mission. You didn't expect to take on more than a dozen ninjas with just us 4, did you? A scowl formed on Miko's face. Hoka sighed and said, it would have been fun to fight them ourselves. Fujin said, apart from that big guy who has a lot of chakra, the others don't seem that strong. So we should be getting more opportunities to fight than you think. Hoka smiled and said, that's more like it. Renjiro was speechless at his students once again. He thought, did they just hope that their allies fail in completing the mission just so that they get to fight more? He let out a cough to attract their attention and said, take a rest for the day. You need to be in top condition tomorrow morning. The trio nodded. Fujin asked, Sensei, when you take the rank S missions, do you perform them alone or do you go with a team? Renjiro was surprised by the question. He answered, depends on the mission. For example, in missions like these that include elimination, I have a team. We need members to find them and to ensure that none of them run away. Fujin heard the reply and thought, that makes sense. I guess the solo missions could contain protecting someone secretly or an assassination mission. He looked at Renjiro and asked, Sensei, do you have information regarding Takahei and Mitsuzuka? Renjiro answered, I checked Takahei's information before taking this mission. He is a veteran jounin and was one of the commanders of the village hidden in hot springs in the previous war. But there isn't much of a record of him fighting. His job was to ensure that they don't get caught in between our and Kumo's clashes. Apart from that, he is known for his earth release and high physical strength. As for Mitsuzuka, he specializes in water release like most Kiri ninjas. And he is quick on his feet. I fought him a couple of times in the previous war. Renjiro looked at Fujin and chuckled, his fighting style is actually quite similar to yours. Though he knows a few rank A jutsus, he prefers to indulge in hit-and-run tactics and fights from a long range. Miko and Hoka's faces scowled on hearing that. Both snorted and looked at Fujin. Fujin wondered, oh, I wonder how I would fare against him. Miko and Hoka were about to protest. They didn't want Fujin to fight the enemy leader while they dealt with scrubs. However, Renjiro spoke first. Renjiro's face got serious as he spoke, he will be my target. I am confident that I can win against him, but you three need to stay on guard. If he manages to slip a water clone away, he will attack you in the back when you are in midst of battle. So keep your guard up all the time. The three recognized the seriousness in Renjiro's voice. They nodded their heads immediately. Renjiro added, just like the last fight, there won't be any weaklings among them. And unlike last time, we won't have the advantage of being in home territory. Also, don't chase them if they manage to escape into the sea. Neither of you three is trained in how to fight a battle in the sea. They agreed. The Kiri ninjas had fought in seas all their life. While they could fight on water, they would be at a disadvantage against Kiri ninjas. Especially as only Hoka had some affinity to the water element. The trio asked for more information from Renjiro. Renjiro provided the information he knew as well as warned them about several things they should pay attention to. They also decided on some strategies to follow during the mission. After discussing, they spent the rest of the day doing light warm UPS and meditation. While Team Renjiro was discussing, Takahei and his subordinates were discussing as well. While Shunso was showing Team Renjiro the rooms, Takahei's subordinates began expressing their displeasure. Seo Shosaku said, we asked Konoha for strong reinforcements. Why did they send little brats? Etsuko Nakamura added, yes. These brats could get in our way when we fight. If they let their opponents get away, we could end up getting ambushed. Takahei-sama, we need to consider this joint mission carefully. Takahei heard them. He began analyzing the actions of Konoha. Seeing that he was lost in thoughts, Nakamura called him out again, Takahei-sama. Takahei looked at him. He replied, let's not jump to conclusions. Konoha has an excellent track record of completing missions. So they might have some plans for sending those kids. His subordinates gave him a weird look. Shosaku said, Do you really think that those kids will be any useful? Takahei shrugged his hands. He answered, if they weren't, why would Konoha send them? And Renjiro wasn't bothered when I looked at them skeptically. Besides, we wanted to complete this mission on our own anyways. So their strength doesn't matter much. In fact, if we perform far better than Konoha's squad, then I can persuade the daimyo to increase funding to build a proper ninja force in our country. If we manage to do that, then we won't have to depend on Konoha. The eyes of his subordinates widened. Shosaku said, that's a great plan, Takahei-sama. Takahei nodded and said, so give your all to this mission. As long as we outperform Renjiro's squad, we will be able to get some benefits from the daimyo. They waited for Shunso to return. When he did, they discussed their strategy and tactics for the next day. The next day, at 3:45 a.m., Renjiro's and Takahei's squads gathered in the mansion. Fujin, Hoka, and Miko observed Takahei's squad. In addition to the 4 they saw the day before, there were 3 more Chunin-level ninjas in his squad. Along with their own squad, they now had 12 ninjas. Fujin observed them and thought, as long as we manage to kill a few Kiri ninjas in the initial sneak attack, we should outnumber them. So this might be an easy mission as well. Takahei looked at Renjiro and smiled. He asked, Renjiro, did you guys rest well? Renjiro nodded and replied, we did. Are you guys prepared? Takahei nodded. Renjiro looked at Shunso and asked, have you marked the locations on the map? Shunso nodded and laid a map on the floor. Everyone observed the map carefully. The towns and villages in the land of hot water were marked on the map. And a location was marked on the southeastern coastline. Shunso pointed at the map saying, this is our current location. According to what we have calculated, their base is around here. Which is around 40 kilometers from our location. Renjiro nodded. He looked at the map once again and then said, all right, let's move. We will hit them before the sun rises. Some of Takahei's subordinates frowned upon hearing that. Shosaku said, I have something to say. Renjiro looked at him. Takahei said, go ahead. Shosaku said, though we have calculated their current location, we still have to be careful about any traps they may have set up. So we need to proceed slowly and carefully. It would be preferable to attack when the sun rises. Renjiro shook his head and replied, don't worry about the traps. We will take care of them. Let's move. Without waiting for their reply, Renjiro turned around and began leaving the mansion. His students followed him while secretly laughing. Shosaku was mad at having his suggestion dismissed so lightly. However, Takahei looked at him and shook his head. Soon, they too followed Renjiro. Chapter 130, Pre-Dawn Raid. The entire group exited the town of Niigata stealthily. Even if those rogue Kiri ninjas had any spies in the town, they wouldn't notice them leaving. After leaving, they traveled at a fast speed. They cover the initial 30 kilometers very quickly. The Yogakure ninjas, who were looking down on the kids, had solemn faces. They were finding it difficult to keep up with them. It was a big blow to their pride. Renjiro looked at their expressions and chuckled. In his experiences, it was always better for actions to do the talking than explaining with words. They traveled the last 10 kilometers with caution. Hoka and Miko used their jujutsus to check for traps and enemies. Fujin didn't use his chakra field. If the enemy had any sensor, then they would sense Fujin's chakra field and give away their surprise factor. Hoka's Byakugan had no such disadvantage. They reached close to 1 kilometer of the calculated spot, when Hoka said, "Stop." Everyone stopped and looked at him. Hoka moved towards the left as others followed him. After traveling about 100 meters, he stopped. Others stopped behind him. The area in front of Hoka was dyed red in blood. Shunso asked, "Did they have a fight here?" Takahei bent down and picked up a long hair from the blood. He observed it and said, "Unlikely. They were probably just hunting wild animals. Looks like they got a bear." Fujin observed Takahei and thought, he's able to guess an animal just from a hair that is dyed in blood. Miko activated her Sharingan and observed the surroundings. After some time, she said, "Found a trail." Renjiro said, "Good work. Take the lead. Also, keep an eye out for traps. Hoka, you keep an eye on traps too. And keep an eye for their base as well. Everyone else, don't make unnecessary noise or movements." Everyone nodded. Takahei commented, "It's very handy to have both the Byakugan and Sharingan in the same squad." Renjiro nodded. They proceeded ahead carefully. Miko's Sharingan observed every detail of the surroundings carefully. She picked up the slightest clues. She observed their trail perfectly. Surprisingly, they didn't encounter any traps. As they kept walking, they left the forest and entered the beach. Miko frowned. She said, "The trail leads into the sea." Renjiro and Takahei both frowned. If the base of the rogue Kirinins was in the sea, then fighting them would get very tricky. Shunso spoke, "I don't think that their base would be out in the sea. The nearest island from here is around 32 kilometers away. Traveling from that base would be very time-consuming." Everyone looked at Shunso as he spoke. Shunso continued, "So either their base is nearby or every one of them is a strong Jounin who can travel at twice the speeds of a Chunin." Takahei immediately shook his head, "There's no way that they are all Jounins. Kiri would be shaken if that many Jounins go rogue." Renjiro said, "There are two possibilities. One is that they have a temporary base here and a permanent one on an island. Or, they just travel on shallow waters instead of moving through the forest to prevent any trail." Takahei nodded and said, "Yes. I believe the second one will be the case. They are rogue ninjas after all. They will be afraid of being hunted down." Renjiro nodded. He too believed the same. He said, "Let's go back to the trees. We will move along the coast while Hoka checks for any possible bases." Takahei agreed as he thought, the Hyuga can look up to 1,000 meters from the edge of the forest, he will be able to check for hundreds of meters into the sea. If their base is truly not here, then we will have no choice but to set up an ambush and wait for them. The group went back into the forest. Seeing their initial trail, the group decided to go in the same direction. After moving for slightly over a kilometer, Hoka stopped. He said, "Found them. They are staying inside a cave on a hill about a kilometer ahead." Shunso grinned, "They think that they are very smart." Fujin wondered, if they are hiding in a cave, will Renjiro try to kill them all? Hoka said, "There are two ninjas guarding the entrance to the cave." Renjiro said, "Keep moving ahead. I'll kill them both." Fujin, "Don't attack." Fujin nodded while thinking, "My wind vacuum bullet is good for assassinating. But once it hits, it will alert even a sleeping person due to the trail of destruction it leaves." As they moved ahead, Hoka said, "Other than the two guards, there are 14 more ninjas inside. 3 seem to be at the Jounin level. Rest are at the Chunin level. They are all sleeping." Renjiro said, "Don't check on them anymore. Hoka didn't understand. He was about to look away from them when he suddenly noticed one of them getting up suddenly. He said, "One of the Jounin level ninjas just woke up." Renjiro frowned. He said, "Some ninjas instinctively feel when someone looks at them. Though they can't sense the Byakugan, they can feel that something is wrong. Keep that in mind." After saying that, he suddenly flickered ahead. Instantly, Hoka, Fujin and Miko also flickered. The Yogakure ninjas, who were alongside them, were dumbfounded. Shusaku exclaimed, "What the fuck?" A scowl formed on Takahei's face. He said, "Keep up." He made a few hand signs and flickered as well. Others soon followed him. Inside the cave, Kubota Mitsuzuka was sleeping. However, when Hoka observed him, his eyes suddenly opened up. He immediately got up and checked his surroundings. On seeing that no one was around, he thought, "What the fuck? I swear that someone was fucking looking at me." Thoughts ran inside his mind at the speed of light. He immediately came to the conclusion, "Fucking Hyaga. Those cowards should have issued a mission to Konoha." He got up and gathered chakra on his right foot and stamped his foot on the ground. A wave passed through the ground. It was harmless, but everyone inside the cave felt it. All the 13 rogue ninjas woke up. Mitsuzuka flickered towards one of the two Jounins. On arriving, he shouted, "Fumimaro. Quickly check our surroundings." At the same time, the other rogue ninjas also began arriving at their location. Kabata Mitsuzuka moved very rapidly. However, there was someone who moved even faster. Renjiro flickered thrice in quick succession and reached just around 150 meters from the guards. On reaching here, he noticed that there were a few traps set close to the cave. However, he didn't pay any attention to them. He stepped on the ground and disappeared inside it. A second later, 8 earth spears formed under the 2 unsuspecting guards and pierced them. The guards were shocked. However, even before they could let out a scream, Renjiro appeared from the ground and beheaded them in one smooth action. As soon as he beheaded them, Hoka, Miko and Fujin appeared behind him. While they were running, Hoka noticed the traps. Miko took the lead to avoid them and the other 2 followed her. On reaching, they noticed the cave. It was a small hill that was as tall as a 3-story building. There was a giant cave mouth at the bottom which split into a few paths. This hill was around 200 meters from the beach. The rogue ninjas chose this spot so that they won't be visible to anyone who scouts for them from the sea, but still be close to the sea if they needed to escape. As soon as they stepped there, they felt a ground wave passing under their feet. Hoka checked the inside of the cave. He frowned and said, "Everyone is up." Renjiro made a hand sign and said, "I figured." Fujin, Hoka, and Miko watched their sensei as he built up a massive amount of chakra. Behind Team Renjiro, the Yogakure ninjas were following. However, without the Byakugan or the Sharingan, they couldn't identify all the traps. Takahei was the first one to notice the traps. He shouted, "Wait! There are traps ahead." However, they were flickering rapidly. 3 of their ninjas ended up activating traps. Immediately, hundreds of needles rained down on them. Takahei frowned and made a few hand signs. Inside the cave, Fumimaro spread his chakra field. Fujin felt his chakra field as it expanded past the cave. He quickly said, "They sensed us." Fumimaro immediately sensed the huge chakra built up by Renjiro. He yelled, "Crap! They are right outside the cave and are about to attack us." All the former Kirinins immediately had grim looks on their faces. Ever since they went rogue, they never had to fight against a proper ninja squad. The Mizukage faction was too busy fighting the rebels. They didn't have the time to pay any attention to them. Renjiro put his palms on the walls of the hill. Earth Release, Mountain Destroyer Jutsu. Chapter 131, Chaos Inside the Hill. Earth Release, Mountain Destroyer Jutsu. Chakra poured from Renjiro's palms into the hill. The hill began collapsing. In merely 3 seconds, the entire hill collapsed. The rogue Kirinins felt the ground under them trembling. In a second, some rocks began falling. Their expressions grew grim. By then, only 11 ninjas had assembled there. 3 still hadn't made it to that room. They understood that they needed to escape. However, escaping to the cave entrance would be very dangerous. Realizing their grim situation, Mitsuzuka made a hand sign. Immediately, a water prison began forming around them. He shouted, "Pour your fucking chakra into this jutsu, everyone." The rogue ninjas wasted no time and immediately began pouring their chakra into Mitsuzuka's water prison jutsu. The water prison became larger and denser as a result of everyone's chakra. Rocks kept falling on it but didn't damage it. However, the first critical time was when the ground under them collapsed. The water prison sphere also fell and maintaining its form became very difficult. Through everyone's desperate efforts, they managed to hold on. The second critical time was when the water prison hit the ground after falling. This time, they didn't manage to maintain the sphere. The impact on the ground coupled with the rocks falling on it broke the jutsu. However, 4 ninjas used water barrier jutsu to provide protection. Outside the hill. While the hill was collapsing, the Yogakure ninjas were struggling with the traps. Takahei erected earth walls to protect everyone. The ninjas themselves used kunaus to block incoming needles. They managed to withstand the barrage. Takahei breathed in relief when one of them fell to the ground. Shunso immediately moved towards him. He checked him. Others gathered around him. Shunso said, "He is all right. It's just 2 needles that hit his thighs." He removed the needles and observed them. The others got worried thinking that the needles were poisoned. After checking the needles and the fallen ninja, Shunso said, "The needles are coated with some anesthetic medicine. He will probably sleep for some time." Everyone breathed a sigh of relief. Takahei said, "Shunso, stay here and keep him safe. Others follow me. It looks like they have already begun fighting. We can't be left out." Fujin, Hoka, and Miko got the front row seat to watch a small hill collapse. However, they weren't very surprised. By now, they had seen a lot of crazy stunts that Renjiro kept pulling. All 3 immediately focused on the rogue ninjas inside the debris. Fujin spread his chakra field to sense them. There was no more need for maintaining stealth. He made a few hand signs and prepared a wind vacuum bullet. Hoka and Miko got ready as well. Inside the collapsed hill, there was chaos. The 11 who were together managed to avoid critical injuries. However, most of them had minor injuries due to pieces of rocks falling on them. One Chunin had a minor concussion. However, the 3 who weren't along with them suffered. 2 of them specialized in the water element, while the last one specialized in the earth element. All 3 had woken up due to the ground wave produced by Mitsuzuka. However, they were deep in sleep and woke up a few seconds later. By the time they began moving, the hill had already begun collapsing. They didn't understand. Similar thoughts ran through their minds. What the hell happened? We were having the time of our life before we went to sleep. Why is this happening? That too right after we left that shithole. The two water affinity ninjas tried protecting themselves, but they were crushed by the rocks. The earth affinity ninja tried going underground. However, the ground under him itself crumbled. But, he still managed to build an earth dome to protect himself just in time. He got buried under the debris but stayed alive. Even before the two sides had met in combat, Renjiro had almost killed a quarter of their numbers. On seeing his efficiency, Fujin had just one thought: need a team my ass. Renjiro made another hand sign and slammed his palms on the ground. Earth release, 1000 needles jutsu. On seeing Renjiro perform another jutsu, his students, once again, had the same thought running through their minds. They thought, please leave one for us too, sensei. At the same time, Mitsuzuka made a few hand signs. Water release, water shock bomb. He spat out a jet of water that hit the debris on top of them. On contact, it exploded and sent the debris flying over. It created a hole for them to escape. However, at that very instant, hundreds of earth needles formed in the ground around them and instantly shot at them. All of them noticed it, however, at varying speeds. The ones who noticed the needles forming jumped up the hole immediately. 6 of them managed to jump safely out of the range of the needles. 3 got cut by a few needles that just cut across their flesh. 1 had a dozen needles stabbing him, but none were critical. However, the last one was unfortunate. He was the slowest to notice and jump. He got turned into a pincushion and died. He didn't die alone. The last member of the rogue group who wasn't with them also died to the 1000 needles jutsu. He had trapped himself inside an earth dome and had no way to get out or defend himself quickly. The number of rogue ninjas dropped to 10. And yet, their misery wasn't over. As soon as they jumped out, they still had to protect themselves from the sneak attacks of the students of the man who made them miserable. The first person to leave the hole was Mitsuzuka. As soon as he left the hole, he saw 3 shurikens targeting him. He quickly deflected them and looked at where the shurikens came from. His eyes landed on Renjiro and widened. He exclaimed, "Motherfucking Senju Renjiro." As soon as the rogue nins left the hole, they were greeted by shurikens thrown by Miko with pinpoint accuracy. Miko targeted the first 2 who left the debris. Both were jounins and they easily blocked her shurikens. Unlike Miko, both Hoka and Fujin could only select one to attack. Hoka felt ambitious. He decided to target a jounin. Whereas Fujin decided to be efficient. Hoka ended up choosing Fumimaro as his target. Fumimaro was the third one to leave the debris. Hoka aimed a vacuum palm at his heart. Fumimaro sensed Hoka attacking him. He spat out a water bullet to counter it. It clashed with the vacuum palm and nullified it. Fujin targeted the 5th person to leave the debris. His chakra was higher than an average Chunin. Guessing him to be an elite Chunin, Fujin chose him. As soon as he appeared, Fujin shot a vacuum bullet at his heart. Unlike Fumimaro, Fujin's target didn't have sensory capabilities. Additionally, Fujin's vacuum bullet was many times faster than Hoka's vacuum palm. He didn't even see the attack coming and had his heart pierced. The rogue Kiri ninjas finally landed on top of the debris. They watched with grim faces. 7 of them had been killed without them even seeing who their enemy was. At the same time, the Yogakure ninjas also arrived there and landed beside Team Renjiro. Their eyes widened on seeing the scene before them. 2 headless corpses with earth spears piercing through their bodies were next to them. The hill where the rogue ninjas were supposed to be had completely collapsed. And the 9 enemies they saw all had some injuries on them, while the Konoha ninjas didn't even have a scratch on them. Mitsuzuka immediately analyzed the situation and yelled, "Disperse!" He instantly flickered away. The others followed him. Team Renjiro and Takahei immediately gave chase. Renjiro made a shadow clone. He chased Mitsuzuka while his clone chased Fumimaro. Takahei went after the third Jounin. Fujin, Miko, and Hoka chose a Chunin level target. Miko and Hoka looked for the ones who have higher chakra amongst the Chunins, while Fujin went after the one who was injured. The remaining Yogakure ninjas were slow. They moved around 1 to 2 seconds after the others. Usually, Takahei would command them, but he was feeling pressure due to their subpar performance so far. So he moved quickly, believing that his subordinates would do their job. They quickly gave chase too. Shosaku went after a Chunin alone. The remaining 4 chased in pairs.